So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and to a map that I have a bit of a soft spot for because it's TOL FALAS, which was the first sort of large-scale custom map that I showed a big battle on, which got a fair amount of attention, so I have a bit of a fondness for it. And it is, that's for good reason, because it is a fun map. It can work out in a variety of different ways depending on how particularly the defenders choose to play it, more so than the attackers. But then that often happens in sort of the more complex maps like this one. So to start with, usually on this outer defence there is a sort of unifying choke point between all of the defenders, which is here. I should mention as well that the texture pop in like this on the trees here is probably going to be fairly severe because I had to turn it down to absolutely the bottom settings in order to make it work. I've mentioned the woes that I've had trying to get this game to function on large battles recently, and it never used to be like that, so again I still don't really know why it's happening, but I also don't really hold out much hope that that's ever going to change at this point, because it's simply not a developmental concern. It's something which only a few of us will ever have to grapple with, which is a bit of an annoyance, but still I did manage to get it working nonetheless, which is nice. But yes, as I was saying, this is sort of the first choke point. There are a sort of series of streets which you can go through here, which usually is defended, and then the defenders will be forced back into two separate portions of the map, the main city over there, and then a sort of outer settlement on a hill over here. And it looks as though the defenders have decided to cut out the middleman this time, and instead Stewed Balrog, who sent me the replay, has posted up at the back of his deployment zone and is going to be meeting up immediately with CPT Gervais, who is already within the settlement over there. But we'll go through the attackers first of all, I think, before we go through the intricacies of the defenders, because the attackers, their job is very simple. They just need to move forward and try and overwhelm. So to start with, we have Froggy, who's playing as Isengard, so he's got some Uruk-hai Raiders, obviously the workhorses of the Isengard army. I shouldn't say the workhorses, they are more so the disposable mainline units that Isengard can use. The workhorses are more the crossbows, the pikes, and the standard infantry. Speaking of which, we do have some Uruk-hai crossbows. Obviously, the attacking armies outnumber the defensive armies, so they already have a bit of an advantage. So in the late game, maybe if those crossbows are still alive and they've still got their ammo, they could be the sort of thing to solidify an attacker's win. I've got some Nazkai in here as well, some Lurtz hunting packs, so some elites up here on the hill. And the rest of his army looks to be mainly raiders, so he's gone for a lot of disposable units, which in a situation where you have to attack forwards, it's not a bad idea. And then we've also got some standard Uruk-hai infantry, which of course are a step above. They do not have their armour upgrades, but still, they will still perform far better than the raiders. We've got some archers as well, so a bit more ranged pressure. More infantry, more raiders, and then Trolls of the White Hand. So all in all, a fairly uniform army this from Isengard. He's gone for a lot of units which he's just going to be attacking with, a lot of shielded units to try and absorb the arrow fire. And he's got a few elites as well, which he's going to use presumably in the late game. We move on to Belisar, who is playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Let's have a look at his front line first of all. So he's got some heavy goblin spears, unsurprising, they can be used to push, and also in melee that AP gives them a nice bit of extra damage against the right targets. More spears, some infantry of course, again very similar to in a similar vein to the Uruk-hai Raiders. They will just be pushed forward, not too much concern for how well they do. They are just here for their numbers and to put pressure on the defensive lines. We've also got some heavy goblin archers hidden in there, some heavy goblin halberds as well, which are going to be weak to arrow fire, but if they can get their phalanx into position they could be pretty effective. Infantry, archers, and then back here I assume we will have his elites. Indeed, his general is going to be with the Goblin King bodyguard. So we can see Azog there, obviously decent place to put the general because they're shielded, a little bit more defensive minded than the blackbacks. It's quite likely that the blackbacks are hidden somewhere as well. We've seen how effective they can be. Snow trolls, the best Misty Mountains sustained combat troll. The cave trolls could be good line breakers, but the snow trolls will last longer in a sustained melee. And then we've got the white Uruk fearmongers, obviously the significantly better alternative to the heavy goblin halberdiers. And I think actually we do have some cave troll drummers, so that's good to see as well, so it should keep all of these lower tier goblins in line. Of course there could be some hidden units out here as well. Then the next army we have Mordor, played by Lucky Hussar. So again we've got some orc archers, just some lower tier archers which are just going to be there to put pressure on the defensive lines to make sure they don't have they can't skirmish with impunity. Essentially they're going to take some counter fire. Fodder of course, free, can just be pushed forward without really too much concern for their safety. 2 units of Black Legion. The Great Shield units obviously can be very, very effective. If the defenders are not ready to receive a push from the Black Legion, it could be the sort of thing which tips the balance into the attacker's favour. Then we've got some Orc Javelins, good cheap Javelins. Temple Executioners, which do not have the armour upgrade this time, but it is the General's Bodyguard unit. And we have the Nazgul, which is not, which is interesting. And a Troll Catapult, in addition to some Olag High, I think this is actually 2 units of Olag High back here, which is a big investment, but they are, of course, very, very strong. He is paying for that in other areas, though. He isn't able to bring quite so much in terms of... Well, his average infantry quality is a little bit lower as a result of bringing all of these elites. You can see that he hasn't really got any morale on infantry. He's just got fodder, orc archers, some orc javelins as well. He has got some morale on halberds and some heavy maulers, but even so, dipping into the red penalty a little bit there for buying his units. And then finally we have Umbar, I believe. Indeed we do, played by Frodo. So some Corsair pikemen, some Nadu Tariq, again without the armour upgrade, some Narduzagar, and again the Harbingers. I believe the Harbingers, like I said in the Siege of Bur Sagath, which we saw them in, I believe they should be a little bit better for what they cost, to be honest with you. They always seem to be a little bit underwhelming. That's just my opinion, though. I've never really seen them be super effective in the same way that I've seen the Haven Guard and the Temple Executioners turn a fight around all by themselves. But, I mean, we'll see what the next patch brings for them, because I think, you know, next to the other options that Umbar can bring for this price point, they aren't really as attractive. Speaking of which, we do have the Narun Aruror Guard. Our Pharazon's going to be here, very safe place to put him. And then we have some Narduk Barweeb and some Belagair Archers, obviously good. Again, going to be good to get some counterfire into the enemy lines. We've also got some Corsair Pikemen, some Crossbow Corsairs, and some Abrazani Nadu Barweeb. You can, of course, go across the bridges into the settlement this way, but with this force, I think Umbar is probably going to just leave that, or at least wait until the time is right. So, next we shall have a look at this army, which is Son of the Dunedain, who is playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. Now, he has got all of his forces clustered together in one big clump. It's possible that he's going to try and run and get into this area. So one of the common problems that the defenders may face on TOL FALAS is that armies can get split up very, very easily with how the map is structured and how the deployment zones work. Here, it could be that Son of the Dunedain is going to try and retreat back into the settlement. I kind of hope he doesn't make it, because that would make the match maybe a little bit too grindy, because then it would just be a series of just like a few choke points where the entirety of the battle would take place around. But we'll see. It's probably the smart thing to do, if nothing else. But yeah, it's going to be difficult to sort of see what he's got exactly. He's got Erebor Legionaries, Dwarven Miners, sort of all the Ironfoot units. He's got some War Goats as well, so some cavalry, which is an interesting choice. And yeah, lots of Ironfoot, and some elites are going to be in there as well, without question. Meanwhile, you can see up here, Stewed Balrog has taken up his position on the hill. He's playing as Dale, which we don't get to see an awful lot of, so I'm glad to see them on the field today. Some Barding Herd, nice Halberdier unit, and then we've got some Dalian Marksmen, some Lake Town Bowmen, Earls of Esgaroth, Barding Herd, Girian's Paladins, which is a good unit to see with their great maces. And just to see in here, we also have some Lake Town River Patrol, Dalian Spearmen, some civilians, and then there's a few units down here all clustered together. Earls of Esgaroth, some Morroquendi in there, some more Barding Herd, more Dalian units, some Lake Town units as well. And finally, we come to CPT Gervais, who is playing as Gondor. He's got a catapult. He does have some cavalry as well, some Pinneth Galen cavalry, so some lancers. And then let's have a look at what we've got over here. Some Gondor archers. And up on this hill we also have some Ramus Ekal garrison archers. I have to say, maybe not the most in terms of skirmish power, as much as I was expecting anyway initially from Dale. We got some Wardens of the White Tower, some Axemen of Lasarnak, and Lothian Honour Guard. Gondorian infantry, pole arms galore with some spearmen, guards of Osgiliath, and then there's a few units over here which are just sort of lying in wait for any potential attacks across the bridge. Some Gondor archers, we've got some Caer Andros swordmasters as well, which is going to be difficult for Umbar to sort of grind their way through. And then I think finally there's going to be one unit up here, indeed a unit of Caer Andros marksmen lying in wait. But I think I will make a little cut here, and I will phase back in when it is necessary, because of course the attackers do have to do a bit of manoeuvring, seeing as the battle isn't going to begin quite as quickly as you would expect on TOL FALAS. Usually there is a defence that has been put out here, but we'll see when it actually does begin in earnest. This could be a bit of a misplay actually by the attackers. You can see that of course Son of the Dunedain by the minimap has gone to meet up with his allies, but we'll talk about that in just a second, as the Pinneth Galen cavalry will be able to get a charge off on the Troll catapult, although sadly for them it was a bit of an impotent charge and they will need to run away. It's a good thing it was a Troll catapult though, because if it was a standard catapult, that could have been the kind of thing that the attackers would really live to regret, because losing your catapult in this situation, particularly now the defenders have sort of set their stand as being very defensive, sort of trying to put up a sort of iron wall which is going to try and just sort of outlast the attackers, sort of play into their hands a little bit by going into a war of attrition. But then again, if there are three factions which can sort of absorb a significant amount of pressure. Dale, Erebor and Gondor are fairly good at that sort of thing. Obviously some nice armor values, pretty good in a grindy sort of fight themselves, but fortunately the attackers are not going to make the mistake of just single filing into these 3 bridges and this sort of ridge that Dale is on. They are going to be putting up a bit of an assault over here as well. Froggy is starting to march across here, so you can see Isengard have marched right across the map to start advancing over here. Mordor are also over here. And indeed it is going to be a bit punishing, but the defenders do still have essentially 3 areas they need to defend. The bridge is over here, the bridge is over here, and of course the other pathway which leads around into the position that Dale has taken up. So there are those 3. I will resume the cut because I was just curious to see whether that cavalry charge would have really dealt significant damage to the catapult. But as it is, it didn't do huge damage, mainly connected with the siege engines themselves. So I will again resume the cut because it looks as though the attackers are still going to take a little bit of time sort of manoeuvring into position before they're ready to begin their assault. Well, it looks as though the Pinnath Gaelan cavalry, actually, that was a shorter cut than I was expecting, purely because they are going to be allowed to get some value off here by going into the Goblin infantry, and admittedly the first unit of Goblin infantry is free, but just trying to rob the attackers of some of their manpower is going to be important, because obviously as the battle goes along, the vastly superior numbers of the orcs and the evil men should come into play. The Troll catapult is also firing, so this might actually be a pretty good place to sort of cut in. The water textures look really awful on the lowest graphic settings. I can only apologise for such things. Some decent hits there from the Troll catapult into the Lake Town Root Patrol, who actually were still hidden, so fortuitous. But it might turn into a catapult duel here, which needs to be won really by the attackers. Good hit there into the Lake Town Bowman, but they're going to need to turn fire ammunition off and go for the Gondorian catapult, I believe, because the Gondorians are definitely going to be returning fire to try and destroy the Troll catapult. If you can rob the attackers of such a good artillery piece, then you've sort of solidified your right to take up a very strong defensive position like this. Would be interesting to see. Like, the Troll catapult, obviously the crew is much more useful than a standard catapult crew in melee, but they're still not as good as regular Trolls, as these 2 pieces of artillery continue to fire backwards and forwards. Interestingly enough as well, you can see these Balagire archers have taken up a position here on this hill, and they are going to be shooting into a unit of Ramasek or Garrison archers, which, interestingly enough, both of these archers have a very similar philosophy to one another, although the Ramasek or Garrison archers are cheaper, and they do have a slightly more favourable position, so they will probably take this engagement. With that being said, the attackers will still want to sort of drain the amount of ammunition the defenders have, which is probably why the Gondorian player is actually pulling their archers back, because they do want to save their ammunition for other things, rather than just getting involved in a messy, grindy skirmish fight with Umbar. Meanwhile, what's going on over here? You can see that there are a few crispy patches, but no more have been formed yet. The Gondorian catapult's still firing into position down here, and actually one of the Troll catapults has been destroyed. So I think the Troll catapult's trying to manoeuvre to get into a better position to maybe counter-fire onto the Gondorian catapult, which honestly would probably be my first choice of target regardless for the attackers. If there's one thing you really don't want the defenders to have when they've taken up such a strong defensive position, is for them to have artillery, particularly in a position like that, because if you try and advance across the bridges, you're going to get splattered by it. Although they could be going for something else. They are trying to shoot across the river by the looks of things. A lot of juicy targets over there. You just saw the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. But I'm not convinced whether this is the right move. Yeah, and instead of hitting the Dragon Slayers like they were surely going for, they instead just hit basic Lake Town Pikes, which, you know, kills are kills, but Troll Catapult is an expensive thing to bring, and you really don't want to just get a few grazing hits on units only for them to be destroyed by counterfire. Meanwhile, the Pinnath Gaelan cavalry is actually winded at this point. It's been running for quite some time, and there's a lot of heavy goblin, well, there's heavy goblin spears after it, as well as trolls, and they've kind of boxed themselves into a corner. But they are going to potentially get a bit of a charge off here on the Goblin infantry. At this point you might as well, because the likelihood of you getting your cavalry out of here at this point in time is minimal. And they do charge into the Goblin infantry, so that is going to be a little bit more damage. Not as much as you might expect, actually, from a unit like this, but they didn't have the biggest opportunity to get charges off. Meanwhile, you can actually see these Gondorian archers, which were skirmishing out in front, were engaged by Alucky Hussars, Morannon heavy maulers, and now you can see the next wave going forward. So Mordor actually forming up the first wave of assault with some Black Legion, so it's possible what they intend here with the Gondorian spearmen forming up a front line, Gondor infantry and guards of Osgiliath coming to back them up, is to try and punch into the city very, very quickly and deny them this outer choke point, which is a pretty good move actually, because it will then give further choke points they need to devote resources to. So it's possible that this highly aggressive strategy from Mordor could pay off pretty quickly. Get back to that in just a moment though. We've got some Dalian marksmen and some Ramasekal Garrison archers just idling here. The Troll Catapult is still firing, so it hasn't been destroyed as yet. And it's pretty unsurprising that the assault on this side of things is going to take longer to get going, purely because it's a real death trap, this one. You've got, obviously, the Pinneth Galen cavalry did escape, but if you try and advance across the bridges, you've got the Dalian skirmishers, which are just going to rip you to pieces, as well as the Dalian catapult. You can go around, but then it's going to take a lot more effort to get through this area. Even if the choke point over here is technically wider, it's going to be tough for the attackers. They're going to need to bide their time and play this carefully, because while they do have a lot of disposable units, they don't have the right to just throw their units away into a situation like this and, you know, essentially get them killed for no gain. Meanwhile, you can see that the Athelian Rangers are firing as well, so again, this is the sort of fight which it's going to be pretty difficult to keep track of. The Black Legion of Barad-dûr did push in, but interestingly enough, the Gondorian line was thick enough that they were able to hold, which is bad news for the attackers. The Black Legion is the sort of tool you can't afford to lose lightly. Gondorian archers who are in melee at this point in time. The body piercing from those Athelian Rangers is surely going to have a hugely detrimental impact on this first Mordor line, particularly seeing as a lot of it is made up of Morannon halberds. No shields on them. Hello though. Orc javelins, throwing a few volleys into the Gondorian line. That will do some good damage in return, provided they hit the right targets. The guards of Osgiliath would be a good one. Deny the Gondorians their pikes, and then your halberds will not run the risk of having a range disadvantage. You'll be able to get more armor-piercing damage down. More Gondor infantry though, so CPT Gervais, or Captain Gervais, is reinforcing his line further, and the Nimlothian Honor Guard are coming in now, so really very, very eager to not allow the attackers to get in quite so easily. But more and more men are going to be pouring forwards, and as we look outwards across the bridge, you can see that there's no shortage of attackers here. So it's whether or not they need to keep this line held very strong for a pretty substantial amount of time during this battle now. Although Gondor are very, you know, they're not backwards in coming forwards, they are definitely willing to commit a lot of resources over here. They do need to be careful. They can't afford to just blob everything up. Otherwise, the Orcs can compensate for that by sending forward some of their nastier stuff. In fact, you can see Olag Kai are coming forward en masse now as well. As the Axemen of Lasarnak getting in here. I think I will just go and have a look at what's going on between the two catapults here. The Gondorian catapult, presumably, actually no, he has ceased fire, but the Troll catapult is not. He's once again, oh, bit of a mistake there. Changed targets. What's he going for this time? That was a very nice hit actually. An unlikely hit considering how small the surface area was they were going to try and hit, but still very nicely done. Barding Herd and Dalian Spearmen here. But still just, you know, biding their time at this point. The defenders just kind of have to sit here and take it. They've, you know, they have essentially backed themselves into a corner, which is fine. They could win that with the army compositions and the armies they have. But they don't have much room for manoeuvre. They now have to just sort of sit there and take whatever the attackers are willing to throw at them. Meanwhile, the Olag Kai are in here and they have punched right through the defensive line, and they're getting into the Athelian Rangers, so going after some squishy targets there. There's also Gondor archers over here. They are going to send up some Citadel Guard to try and deal with the Olag Kai, and that AP will help, but you would still imagine the Trolls are going to inflict hefty casualties on these Gondorians. And unfortunately as well, some guards of Osgiliath have moved forward, as well as the Nimlothian Honor Guard, but the Orc Javelin's getting a lot of value off here. The Orc Javelins, of course, very, very cheap. Their missile damage is not quite as much as, obviously, the better Javelins in the game, but that's still, you know, AP damage they're being forced to take. And now the Olag Kai turning around and rear-charging this Gondorian line, which, provided reinforcements come up to sort of keep the frontal assault going, the attackers could be in pretty good shape over here. The Olag High getting a lot of damage done. But do remember, of course, the Olag High are expensive. You can't afford to lose them flippantly, so the attackers do need to make this count. Resource management. The Mordor forces on the front line are not really enjoying this fight. Unsurprisingly, it's been pretty nasty for both sides. The Orc Javelins couldn't get out of ammo at this point, so they're just going to be committed forward. There's also some Orc Archers, sending forward some Uruk-hai Archers, which are now firing back. And I think they're going to try and counterfire. There's Fountain Guard, there's Caer-Andros Swordmasters, there's all sorts being committed into this fight over here. So both Gondor and Mordor have really thrown the kitchen sink at one another. Isengard have also been involved pretty heavily over here. You can see actually the Orc Javelins managing to sort of sneak through the lines, but they're going to break pretty quickly, you would imagine. The only thing that's waiting for them on the other side of this line, after all, is a column of Fountain Guard and Caer-Andros Swordmasters. And even by sort of cheap Orc standards, the Orc Javelins are not exactly the last word in terms of quality, but a lot of Uruk-hai Archers now over here, firing a lot of their ammunition into these defensive lines. Here we can see the Gondorian Archers taking up a decent position. They're good in a skirmish fight as well, to be fair. But in the chaos of this battle, and considering the amount of offensive skirmishes we're seeing, we'll see. This will be a real task for them. Uruk-hai Raiders now coming forward, another unit of Black Legion. And this is a situation in which the Black Legion could be significantly powerful, because they could very well push through here. Although they have chosen the section of line with the Nimlothian Honour Guard, so they are going to pay for this pretty dearly. And the attackers also need to have infantry waiting on standby to follow them in. Otherwise it's going to go pretty badly for them. As soon as they're finished pushing and they get into a sustained melee, Great Shield units are not exactly the fastest at dealing damage. I'm very surprised actually they didn't coordinate this so that a unit of Uruk-hai Raiders wasn't following them in. But regardless, the Olag-hai are now all dead. The Black Legion are back here at this point, might be trying to silence the archers, although honestly the melee units here on the front line are probably the main concern, with Nimlothian Honour Guard and the like. Axemen of Lasarnak actually routing at this point, so that did have a pretty big impact on the Gondorian will to fight. Let's go and see what's happening over here though, because it does look as though we're about to, well, we have actually got the first engagements over here. Heavy Goblin Spearmen going up against civilians. Of course there's only going to be one winner in that fight. The civilians can beat really very little. They've got better attack values than you would expect for a unit that is essentially peasants wielding farming implements, but they're still not great. So the Heavy Goblin Spears will have little issues slowly but surely poking their way through. I'm a little bit surprised they're out here all on their own, to be honest with you. The only reason for doing that would be to pin the attackers with skirmish fire as they move forward, but from the looks of things the Dalians are not going to be firing in there, even if they do have a lot of skirmish power up here. A lot of the Dalian power is focused on this hill actually, which is interesting. Be interested to see what the dwarves are doing at this point. Their forces are sort of scattered all throughout the area, because so far the Gondorians have certainly bore the brunt of the casualties for the defenders, and now over here we can see the Trolls of the White Hand are coming in, so no rest for the weary. The Black Legion of Barad-dûr, they are starting to take some substantial losses, but they have also caused a chasm to open up in this defensive line over here. This is the sort of situation in which there could be a crash, so I'm a little bit nervous to zoom in too much, even without reshade on. More javelins just being thrown in over here, and this is the problem I think with relying on static defensive lines. You know, the defenders definitely wanted to form up a really solid defense with all three of them in this settlement. The problem with doing that is that it also allows the attackers to focus all of their strength in one area. And this is what's happening right now. Gondor has essentially had to try and commit loads of resources to defend this one line, but the attackers are always going to have options to break through a simple defensive line. You need to be a little bit more savvy, I think, with how the game is now, with all of the options that you have available to you. A simple defensive line of just Fountain Guard backed up with infantry no longer will cut the mustard against players who know what resources they have. Like you saw, they sent up an initial attacking line, which wasn't really too much of a threat, but then they started pouring javelin fire in. They started to commit forward their Trolls, their Black Legion as well. Now they've got their Temple Executioners forward also. And in the end, all of these defensive skirmishers, there were simply too many targets for them to kill off too quickly. And now the attackers are getting into the settlement as a whole. Froggy getting in here. And again, that's one of the reasons why I actually think Son of the Dunedain might have been better off staying in the position he started off in. Because then the attackers would have to be a lot more careful, because if they just committed all their forces over here, the dwarves would then be able to pin them in the back, and you don't want, receiving an aggressive advance from dwarven infantry is the sort of thing which basic orc units are not going to be able to stand up to. Meanwhile, Karandros marksmen, as far as archers go in melee, they are really very, very good. And they're going to stop the advance of these Uruk-hai raiders, although the problem is really at this point numbers. The attackers are coming forward with really an awful lot of strength.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
It is worth saying though that the attackers have committed forward basically all of their resources for this assault over here at this point. All of their units that they want to commit are across the river, which does mean they do run the risk of running out of steam here. There's Uruk-hai infantry running through the city streets. Very little left of the Black Legion. Temple Executioners are here also though. The Nazgul are here. Which means the Karandros marksmen are going to be surrounded and destroyed. But if the attackers do run out of steam over here, that means the defenders could then focus all their efforts on defending the first, or the frontal choke points, which could be a real boon for them, but I'm still not seeing any non-Gondorian units over here, which to me suggests that Dale and the dwarves are just sort of ignoring the plight of their ally, which eventually is going to bite them in the back too, because if they just keep ignoring the Gondorians, all of these orcs are going to be attacking their defensive position in the back. And that presumably is when the attackers on the frontal area in front of Dale and the dwarves will then begin to advance across the bridges and into Dale's position in earnest, although to be honest with you, it does look as though this attack has already begun in earnest. The Dalian spearmen and the Barding herd forming up a very strong front line. More, well, see, that's Girian's paladins. From a distance I thought that was more Barding herd, but they're sending forward a very elite unit here. And needless to say, all of these units are going to pretty easily deal with basic goblins, but you can see that once again the attackers are going to use this, or try and use the same tactic on this side, using the Snaga skirmishers, cheap javelins, to pick away at the defensive line, and then presumably they're going to send forward some power units. You've got the Troll Catapult back there, for example. Belagire archers returning fire into the Dalian position. This is a bit of a mess at this point, but Dale's certainly returning fire. Actually, there is some advances going across the bridges, and at this point they can afford to, because all of the Dalian focus has to be on this defensive line over here, so they are now free to advance across the bridges, although that will be into a dwarven front line, so how effective that's actually going to be we shall wait and see. But it's been a good assault, I think. I think the attackers have done a really, really good job so far of dismantling this defence. We'll see if that lasts, however, because of course eventually the quality that the defenders have could shine through. Heavy Goblin Spears, the Dalians trying to wrap up the line, and you can actually see that it did work in a way, this catapult her. The catapult also doing a lot of damage. We'll see, the Dalians could counter-attack down here, although reinforcements are now on the way up, but I think really the main event at this point is taking place in the city streets, as the defenders at this point are caught like rats in a trap. You can see they have actually set up another defensive line over here. So they are essentially going to be camping in this area. They have lost the city, for all intents and purposes. There's still a few Gondorian units trying to pull back. I feel a bit sorry for the Gondorian player, actually. He had to hold that position all by his lonesome, and in the end, just the sheer numbers and force of the attackers forced him out of the way. What is that? That is Blacklock Engineers shooting the attackers as they move through. And that is a position they can afford to take up, because the only way through would be through the defensive line. But again, as soon as these defensive lines fall, if they fall, that would be real bad for the defenders. Meanwhile, we do have some Ironfoot Wargoats, which are presumably just going to try and cover the retreat of what little of the Gondorian forces remain. Actually getting caught on the troll there. And also not really getting the best of engagements with the Uruk-hai infantry. Bit unfortunate there for the dwarves. I don't know. I feel as though the attackers have done a really good job thus far, and also it didn't escape my attention. They realised they were going to be facing dwarves on the front line, so they sent forward Abrazani Nadu Tariq with their AP maces. Now it's a bit unfortunate that they sent them forward without much support, because this initially is exactly the sort of thing you want to do, but unfortunately really for them, they were the only ones sent forward, so they will eventually just be overwhelmed through sheer force of numbers. But it was definitely the right beginning to a strategy, and that's really the only negative that I can mention for the attackers so far. They sent forward that initial unit of Black Legion maybe a little bit too soon, but initially I think their engagements have gone very well. It remains to be seen whether or not they have the resources to actually keep this up. You can see that Dale are actually pushing back against this assault over here, but obviously that has also meant they are now in range of the Abrazani Nadubawi, who are getting some nice shots along the line. Lake Town River Patrol, who presumably have used up their javelins already, now in melee. The Troll Catapult crew coming forward again. They are certainly not the match of something like the Olag Isle Trolls of the White Hand, but they will still do decent damage. They are still trolls after all. But the Barding Herd continuing to move forward with those large glaives. More reinforcements are needed up here, I think, and more Goblin infantry is filtering in, but I think something a little bit more substantial might be required to solidify any sort of victory here. One of the reasons why I like TOL FALAS is how differently it can work out. And again, this is a completely different way that the battle has gone every time I've seen this battle. I haven't seen it work out like this before, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the map. Some routing Black Legion there. Interestingly enough, this is actually a difficult place to assault. So Froggy and Lucky Hussar needs to sort of... They do need to sort of group their armies up, but the problem with doing that is the longer you dither, the more fire that all of these defensive skirmishers are going to be able to get in on you. Not great for them. But even so, I feel as though initially they've done very well to destroy Gondor. Although, we will know in the end game screen by how many kills Gondor got, whether or not that did turn out to be worth it in the end. It's very difficult when you're sort of seeing the battles from this perspective to see whether it is going to be worth it from a kills point of view, because there's so many units in such a dense area that it can be difficult to see. Belagire archers firing into this defensive position, killing off a few miners. Pinneth Galen cavalry. At this point, the main engagement is happening up here on this hill, and the Dalians are having the best of it. Again, the Misty Mountains, the basic Misty Mountains units are really not going to be a match for what Dale can throw at them. Dale are now also going to just pull back. Lake Town River Patrol are actually going to charge forward with the Dalian Spearmen. Bit of a waste of individual manpower, to be honest with you. They routed as soon as they got into melee. They were never really going to accomplish all that much. But it's possible that Stu Balrog was just sort of committing them forward so that he could try and reorganise a defensive shape over here, getting ready for the next wave, which is coming forward by the looks of things. Goblin infantry, Snaga. They're going to need something a little bit more substantial, though. There is more heavy goblins back here. Halberds as well. The drummers aren't actually close enough to really affect the frontline battle, which means they're not really doing much to help back here. We shall see how this goes. But now, an engagement has started over here, so this will be where the defensive line is tested. Now, Barding Herd are obviously much better than Moran on Halberds, and also, well, we do have the Temple Executioners on the front line, and the Nazgul are probably around here as well. Indeed they are. Gondor Archers getting into a nice position, though, to shoot them. Again, the Temple Executioners will be tough to deal with, but at this point I think the defenders do have quality units that they can commit here to just kill them off. There are some Lake Town Pikemen taking some arrow fire, as again the attackers trying to use their skirmish power, although the Uruk-hai crossbows immediately being focused down, which is certainly the right thing to do. You definitely don't want Isengard to have too much access to those AP missiles. Elves of Esgaroth fighting something. Gondor Archers still firing away. Here are the Temple Executioners. They might not have their armour upgrade, but they're still going to be a really difficult, well, I say that, a difficult unit to beat in melee, but it looks like melee is not the plan. Instead, the Lake Town River Patrol are going to try and destroy them with their AP javelins, which is a good use of resources there. And then we can see some Athelian Rangers loitering with intent. Again, it looks as though Isengard trying to skirmish with some of these units, but it's difficult from this position to really get good shots off. And slowly but surely, you can see how that initial attack has taken a bit of a toll on the attackers on this side of things. The attackers on the other side need to sort of pick up the pace at this point, because the attackers on this side are going to lose eventually. They're not going to have the manpower to keep this up. In fact, they might already be falling apart. You can see the goats are coming forward here. Now they're going to be able to do some more damage to the skirmishers. They can't afford to hang around too long in melee though. There aren't many of them, and there are a lot of Uruk-hai there, skirmishers or no. Meanwhile, there's Daly in position up here. Still holding. Heavy Goblin archers backed up by Snaga. Interestingly enough, a single unit of Earls being used as a rear guard at this point. Not the sort of unit you want to throw away too carelessly. They're already shaken after all. A quality unit of infantry. As we have a look here, the epic duel between the Snaga and the Knight of Dale. Go on, you can kill a Snaga. Well, there goes the Mordor general at the hands of Lake Town pikemen. Not often you see Lake Town pikemen having a favourable engagement with Temple executioners, as all of these javelins continue to be thrown. Again, heavy Goblin archers being committed to the front line. I feel as though if the attackers were going to be really aggressive on the other side, the attackers on this side needed to be pretty aggressive as well, because as time has gone on, the defenders have been allowed to commit more and more resources back here, and this has allowed them to just crush Froggy and Unlucky Hussars, Isengard and Mordor armies. Ultimately, they have run out of manpower as time has gone on. Ironfoot warriors from Son of the Dunedain coming forward to assist the Lake Town River Patrol, try and finish off these Uruk-hai. Will they be successful or not? We shall see. Kenneth Galen cavalry still alive as well. Initially I was worried for the defenders based on how that Gondorian defence went down, but at the end, when we see Gondor and their kills, I would assume that Gondor did enough damage to make it worth it in the end for them. The attackers over on this side have been a bit sluggish, in my opinion. And now we've got Corsair pikemen slowly making their way across the bridges. These bridges are pretty awkward to use, to be fair. Pathing your units across bridges has been a problem in Medieval 2 since forever. Meanwhile, these Earls of Esgaroth are actually still holding, which goes to show what exactly they're fighting, because they're horribly outnumbered, but it's by heavy Goblin archers and Snaga. To be fair, there are some Balagyr archers on the front line now as well, but Dale are being allowed to hold their ground with very limited manpower. I mean, at this point, you know, the Misty Mountains need to commit forward something a little bit tougher. And they are going to be sending forward some Mountain Orc Berserkers, so that AP will help. It's already too little too late though. You can see that the defenders are 10 percentage points ahead. We've got here Earls. Again, this is still a strong front line. They've still got Barding Herd, they've still got skirmishers that they can use, they've still got the Girians, Paladins. It's going to be a tough ask, I think, for the attackers to keep up an assault. Meanwhile, we do have an assault now, reaching this side of the bridge, although these Corsair pikes are unlikely to enjoy being under arrow fire. It's a very thin front line actually from the dwarves, but considering it's only Corsair pikes that are moving forward unsupported again. Well, there are Balagyr archers, but you really need a dedicated infantry unit to support your pikes if you're going to make a real push like this, particularly into a dwarven defensive line. And now you can see Erebor legionaries are also moving forward, and now with the collapse of the attack at the rear, more and more resources are going to be pointing forwards in this section of the battlefield. So you can bet, now you can see that down from the hill, Dale is sending forward some skirmishers, some Athala rangers and some Morroquendi bows. There are some Abrazanim Narduzagar that have come forward now, but it might be too little too late, and they are also another unit which won't do too great under sustained skirmish fire from all of these units. They've got decent armour values, but the lack of a shield and the lack of multiple HP does mean that they're a good unit to go after with your skirmishers, particularly in this situation. where they represent really the only true threat. Corsair pikemen will be crumpled out of formation, which means they will just be absolutely mulched by the dwarves. As you can see, it's happening already. This pike unit has actually managed to get in formation, but that won't last too long. Some Balagar archers snuck in behind the lines, but Erebor legionaries was their only reward. The dwarves now collapsing in on this position, and the Abrazanim breaking. And Umbar's elite units, or more elite units like this, they don't have locked morale, the Abrazanim, but still good morale. Meanwhile, once again, the second attempt to try and bust through this defensive line, as the Misty Mountains send forward some X-Men this time, in addition to more heavy Goblin archers. But again, it's going to be a combination of Earls and Barding Herd, although at this point, they are running a little bit lower on manpower up here. They do still have the support of all those archers, however, and if necessary, they do have Dalian Marksmen, Spearmen, and if necessary they have the Girians, Paladins, and some Ironfoot up here as well. Let's go and see what's happening back here, because I can't imagine the Wardens of the White Tower are fighting something. There's 2 Nazgul left alive, one engaged in a duel with an Earl, and one of which I assume is over here, yes, but he's being hounded by the Wardens of the White Tower, so he won't be lasting too much longer. Uruk-hai crossbows trying to do some damage over here, but at this point it's really just a matter of delaying the inevitable, trying to draw off as much of the defending units as they can back here so that their allies can try and do something from the front. Isengard don't have too much left to accomplish that with. They've still got some Uruk-hai infantry, but for the most part it's skirmishes. Also these Earls of Askaroth over here, which I'm surprised are not charging into the side over here. What's going on over here? Uruk-hai archers versus Wargoats. The Wargoats actually don't have enough men in the unit left to actually win this fight, I don't think. Well, maybe. The Uruk-hai archers pretty much die with every swing, so that will be a close run thing. Now we can see the Goblins are starting to move forward a lot of their units. The Harbingers of Castamere have also come forward from Umbar, so a much more genuine push at this point. The Snow Trolls are also coming forward. The Cave Troll Drummers now going to be influencing the fight by keeping all these Goblins in melee for even longer than they otherwise would be. It's about bloody time we're seeing another good push from the attackers over here. The attackers started off really well, I thought, but they have run out of steam, so obviously I was wrong. Corsair pikemen broken, fighting to the death. It is a very difficult defensive position to break down, to be fair, if you don't have the right resources. And I feel as though maybe a few more siege weapons would have helped. Try and make the defenders feel a little bit more uncomfortable. With these Corsair pikes as well, you can see the power of the defending skirmish line has really come into its own. These Corsair pikemen just taking point-blank fire from the Gondorian archers, which, despite the fact that a lot of his army was defeated relatively quickly, the Gondorian is definitely... the support that he's offered the Dwarves and Dale in this defence has definitely been appreciated, I'm sure. Ironfoot crossbows also in position. Morroquendi bows actually might be out of ammunition with their blades out, but to be fair, they were also probably a part in why the attack back here went south so quickly for Froggy and a lucky Hussar. Uruk-hai archers going toe-to-toe with the Earls of Askaroth. And losing, obviously. So Uruk-hai crossbows getting some nice shots in. So Uruk-hai archers victorious over the Ironfoot Wargoats. They actually routed. Interesting. Froggy has clung to life very admirably at this point. Does he have more units? I haven't seen the... Well, he does have the Naz-Kai, which that's a strong unit. It does need support, otherwise it will just be overwhelmed, but even so. The gap is now 11%, so the defenders are actually even further ahead at this point, but we'll see if the attackers can turn this around, because the defenders have had to commit forward a lot of stuff. Morroquendi bows moving up here, and again, this is really the site, the sort of area of main interest at this point. The Snow Trolls dealing a lot of damage to this primarily skirmish army up here. Ironfoot Warriors now moving forward to try and patch up the line. They do need to get in there as well. Lake Town Bowmen firing into probably the Castamere's Rangers. That would definitely be my target. Although no, Might be the Crossbow Corsairs, actually. They're shooting onto the bridge, so yeah. Madness at this point, but you can see how much damage the snow trolls have done. Again, a lot of this line was made up of archers that were out of ammunition. The Earls and the Barding Herd had already taken a pretty substantial amount of damage. Let's see what's going on over on this side. The Dalian Spearmen are holding, but Harbingers of Castamere are over here, and they will support their Goblin allies. More units are being committed as well, so Corsair Blackguards are on their way over, the Naruna Aru Royal Guard, some Crossbow Corsairs, 2 units of Blackguards it is in fact. So this area over here is in peril. What's going on over here? Surely the Nazgul aren't still fighting. There are still 2 Nazgul, that's unbelievable. Wardens of the White Tower will eventually kill them. Meanwhile, over here, Isengard have actually managed some kind of victory over here. That's madness. The Nazkai in close proximity now, but the Uruk-hai infantry proving their worth there. But the problem is at this point, the Athala Rangers are going to be able to shoot with impunity into this Isengard blob, that body piercing. Going to do a pretty nasty amount of damage indeed. We do have some Ironfoot Warriors over here as well, so this is actually good play by the defenders, because this means that Isengard, the only way they can retreat would be back down through here, which it means they're still going to be taking body piercing damage all the while. This was going to be their only escape route, and the Dwarven infantry has blocked that. I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but if it was, certainly well executed. No, that's the sound effects from the Nazgul still fighting on. This, meanwhile, this has got crash written all over it if I zoom in, so I won't. Corsair Blackguard's fairly close now, and you can see the difference that the Cave Troll Drummers make. Practically all of these goblins are still fighting hard. That morale buff, very, very useful. Some Lake Town Bowmen being committed to the front line, but at this point, if you were the defenders, you'd start to worry about this, because there's a lot of manpower concentrated over here, and your line is not going to hold forever. And yeah, it has dipped back a little bit more, but the attackers, having said that, do need to try and they need to break through there as quickly as they possibly can, basically. Otherwise the percentages are just going to get too far away from them. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are shooting now as well, presumably into the Nazkai. Indeed they are, already getting some kills off with that AP. The Ironfoot Warriors doing well here. The Uruk-hai infantry have already done so much that they are now running out of steam, and the dwarves killing them off. The Nazkai having to advance through a hailstorm of arrow fire, and now the Wardens of the White Tower, fresh from their victory over the Nazgul, even though it did make them very tired, going to come forward. Actually taking some damage from the Uruk-hai crossbows themselves. Tit for tat. Here come the Nazkai. This is the fight the Nazkai should win. The Nazkai, they're both very tired units, but the Nazkai, this is the kind of fight they like to be in against a more defensive-minded unit, that AP that they dish out. They've also got the crossbow support, potentially. The problem might be that all of the other Isengard units are probably going to fall by the wayside, but even so, Froggy has lasted far longer in this situation than he had any right to, so that's definitely to his credit. Over here, Athala Rangers trying to reposition themselves. Do the defenders have enough to stop all of this, is the question. Mountain Orc Berserkers moving forward. We've still got a few units of skirmishers down there, but not really much else. But this is a pretty big concentration of strength at this point. Snaga skirmishers, I don't know whether they still have ammunition or not. Harbingers of Castamere have actually managed to get behind enemy lines and are starting to stab some of these Dalian defenders in the back. Speaking of Snaga though, these ones have managed to get through the line as well, and getting pinned in the back by AP javelins, even if they are of as low a quality as the Snaga skirmishers, the sort of thing which is going to make this line fall apart finally. Go on, throw your payload. There we go. Again, there aren't many left in the unit, so it's not going to be devastating, but it is the sort of thing which might make this front line break, which is good. for the attackers. And it will also force the defenders to go into their final stand, which will be sort of this area over here, you would imagine. How long can Froggy last, though? That is the question. There's very little in the way of Uruk-hai infantry left. The Ironfoots dealing damage to them. The Uruk-hai crossbow is actually situated in a good position to get some pot shots on them in the back. You can see here the Nazkai. Balance of force is evenly matched, however. I suppose I wasn't really giving the Wardens of the White Tower full credit, because they are one of the best sword and board units in the game. As you would expect from the Gondorians, considering their sort of focuses on their army being a little bit more defensively minded. But I would still have expected the Nazkai's damage to see them through. It might be there's some sort of ranged interference going on, or was perhaps, but even so, you'd imagine the defenders are probably still going to sort of win this now. The Ironfoot warriors getting there to support the Wardens of the White Tower, also some dregs of some other individual units as well, so it's just going to be a matter of numbers. Froggy won't be able to last for too much longer, you would imagine. Dwarven miners pulling back. Over here is where the defenders need to be a little bit more concerned. There's Snaga running rampant. Harbingers of Castamere doing some nice damage after rear-charging Gondorian archers fighting to the death. The Girian's Paladins evacuated some time ago, however, so yeah, finally the attackers have managed to get the defenders out of one of their central defensive positions. The initial choke point attack seems a long time ago now. What have we here? Are the Nazkai turning this around? They are not. Additional support from the dwarves might be the straw which breaks the camel's back here. This could be the end of Isengard. What's going on here? Well, this explains why the crossbows have been so tied up. They've been hunted down by the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. The Dalian General is here. Yeah, the Uruk-hai crossbows don't stand a chance against the Dragon Slayers in melee. A few Dalian marksmen also there, just lending a hand. So now, you can see the defenders are pulling back. So they are going to be defending this final mountain road. And that will be the final phase of this battle. Still a fair amount of time to go there. You can see there are some Harbingers still sort of chanting. There might be a cut involved depending on a few factors, although Umbar are moving forward with quite a lot of haste, so maybe not. What have we here? Nazkai, defeat seems certain. Yeah, the Wardens of the White Tower, I mean, this has shown how strong they can be. Because even initially, on the initial engagements, they were doing pretty well for themselves, considering the amount of damage the Nazkai do. And that's going to be the end of these Uruk-hai crossbows, so the Blackshot Dragon Slayers and the Dalian Marksmen. Maybe going to recharge the Nazkai and try and finish them off. We shall see. As Umbar's skirmish line gets a little bit closer. They really want to finish off those Nazkai before they retreat up into their final stand. Which again, you can't really begrudge them that. Well done to the Wardens of the White Tower there. The Gondorian player in general has probably managed to rack up quite a lot of kills after the main bulk of his army died off, based on how well the units he left behind have done. Those Gondorian archers, these guys, the Athelian Rangers, some Dwarven miners getting in here as well. Where are those Dragon Slayers? There they are. A rear charge from the Dragon Slayers should be enough to hasten the demise of these Nazkai. Hello. They're fighting something.
Only half the
Erebor
enemy
legionaries,
force remains.
who are surrounded, but those Castamere's Rangers are also getting pinned in the back by skirmishers. Although I'm not sure whether the Castamere's Rangers still have ammo. That would be an interesting question to ask. Regardless of whether or not they do, they are still getting shot though. Yeah, there goes Isengard's general.
Have slain the enemy general. Without me, his troops will lose their will. Fight. Only half the enemy force remains.
There isn't many of his troops that are left to fight anyway, only 7 in fact. I gotta give Froggy a good deal of credit for fighting on when things were really bleak for him back here. He bought his team as much time as he could. Mordor, on the other hand, it took a lot of their manpower to get through that very comprehensive Gondorian defence, because really a lot of resources from both teams was expended very quickly into this fight with that first engagement. Yeah, with the black shots over here, the Nazkai finally going to go down, which means now it's going to be a fight of one front and one front only. Snaga skirmishers throwing their payloads. We've got some heavy Goblin infantry. The Crossbow Corsairs are over here. The Erebor Legionaries doing really very well for themselves, all things considered. The Crossbow Corsairs getting into a position to shoot something. What will they shoot, though? Presumably this defensive line over here made up of spears. And unsurprisingly, they are immediately being focused down. This is where their glass cannon nature really starts to work against them. They should be able to do a decent amount of damage to the Dwarven front line there. Although those shields will help the Dwarves somewhat. Actually, I'm not sure whether the crossbows bypass shields or not. Something does, but I can't remember what it is. It might be crossbows. Lert's hunting pack. So Froggy's still technically alive. He still does have another unit, and they are body-piercing units, no less. Isengard's Rangers. Lert's hunting pack. Is this Lert's over here himself? Yeah, there he is. He just looks like a standard raider with a bow on his back, but I know I'm terribly racist. All Uruk-hai look the same to me. Erebor Legion, again getting pinned in the back by Snaga. Not great for them, but they're fighting hard and doing well. What are the defenders going to do? Are they going to move forwards? That would be an interesting gambit. We have a look here. The gap is closing. It is closing. But the defenders are still ahead, so we shall see. Goblin King Bodyguard still alive. A few individual elite units for the attackers still here. And indeed, Son of the Dunedain is going to come forward and reinforce this area. Ironfoot crossbows, who are certainly out of ammunition, are going to charge in, try and do some damage to this heavy gob infantry. There are those crossbow corsairs up on the hill, which when their ammunition connects is going to be pretty grisly. Harbingers of Castamere also charging in, Mountain Orc Berserkers coming forward. Are there any Blackback Mountain Berserkers? That would be a pretty key unit to see here in the late game. Lert's hunting pack getting up on the hill with the crossbow corsairs. Maybe a bit of a lapse in judgment by Son of the Dunedain to send these Ironfoot crossbows forward. They were never really going to accomplish much, and this is manpower that has essentially been wasted. What is the point of this building here? It's practically just a roof that's been built on the floor. Meanwhile, oof. Unit of Ironfoot Spears taking a savaging from the Crossbow Corsairs. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers, however, resuming firing into maybe the Trolls? Something over here regardless. The defenders pouring a lot of fire, and that could be a good reason to send these Ironfoot crossbows in, cluster the enemy up, so that they're like fish in a barrel for you to shoot. And you can see the standard skirmishers going after the right target, the Mountain Orc Berserkers, because they will go down very quickly under arrow fire. And considering that a lot of your defending units are going to be heavily armoured, they're a unit you really want to get rid of. That AP. Lert's hunting pack getting into position. They are impetuous. And again, all of these dense defensive lines which the defenders are setting up at this point becoming a little bit difficult to maintain. Heavy Goblin infantry victorious now over here. These heavy Goblin halberds are still very slowly moving along in formation. Goblin King Bodyguard still hanging back. There are Blackback Mountain Berserkers, so from an attacking point of view that's a very good thing indeed. Meanwhile, some Dwarven Miners going to charge into the side of this heavy Goblin infantry, and their AP as well. Although to be fair, they didn't really get too much of a charge off, which is unfortunate. The terrain worked against them there. Now the Cave Troll Drummers and the rest of the attackers starting to swarm. Abrazani Nadubawi. There are some Ironfoot warriors as well, only 30 of them, mind you. And they're shaken. Heavy Goblin infantry charging in. They did manage to catch up to the Blackshot Dragon Slayers and stop them firing, which will be a reprieve for the attackers. Some Dwarven miners over here being supported by the Ironfoot warriors, but I'm not sure whether this is the kind of fight they really want to be in if they can help it. I don't think... Well, to be fair, this Heavy Goblin infantry doesn't really want to be fighting alone either, because this Dwarven defensive line is going to repulse them fairly easily. Alone, anyway. As soon as they start receiving support, whether from range or just other infantry units, that might change. Now you can see the Blacklock Engineers firing, doing a lot of damage to the attackers as they move forwards. Heavy Goblin Halberdiers taking a bit of a beating there. Still got those Crossbow Corsairs though. The Lurtz Hunting Pack has taken a huge amount of damage. Oof. Snaga taking damage as well. The defenders really want the skirmish advantage, you can tell, if they're using Blacklocks to go after Snaga. Halberdiers. They've still got their Fearmongers as well, which could be an important unit. They've still got 2 units of very battered Corsairs. The Narunaaru Royal Guard. Goblin King's Bodyguard. I don't know if the attackers have got the oomph left. Let's have a look at what the defenders have, to be fair though. I mean, they've got basic Dwarven units as well as some... Well, they've got the Athala Rangers, so that body piercing certainly won't hurt. Combined with the crossbow body piercing of the Blacklocks, it's going to be... It's a situation where the attackers don't really want to blob up. Got a lot of polearms, Ironfoot Pikes, Erebor Legionaries, Spears, Highborns of Erebor. They've got nothing really that's like super strong. The Highborns and the Blackshots are strong, sure, but we'll see. 8 percentage point difference at this point. The attackers have only 10% of their total forces remaining. Will that be enough? We still have over 10,000 frames left. That first attack was pretty disastrous. The Heavy Goblin infantry has returned, but it really needs to be supported when it advances forward. I'm not really sure how the attackers want to approach this. The White Orc Fearmongers are now moving forward. I think the time has come for them to just grab a hold of their balls and move in, because the defenders are not going to come down the hill and get them. And it looks like they're slowly moving their halberds into position. Though I would certainly not be surprised if the White Orc Fearmongers find themselves the attention of a lot of the ranged firepower that the defenders have left. Because they are potentially... is that... Oh, it's just Goblin Archers panicking and routing. Heavy Goblin Archers moving down from the hill. What are they trying to do? Trying to get up here to skirmish? Ah yes, probably moving up here to try and skirmish down into the lines, but that didn't really work out. I'm very surprised actually. This is quite sporting of the defenders to move down from their defensive position here. There are also still Ironfoot crossbows, to be fair. And they're going to be shooting the White Orc Fearmongers. Dwarven miners, Ironfoot spears, so they are moving forward, trying to catch these goblins unawares. Bolts just flying all over the place. White Orc Fearmongers taking damage. Morale is proving to be a bit of a problem at this point for the Misty Mountains. The dwarves sending more units down the hill. White Orc Fearmongers have taken damage. It's not damage which is going to make them impotent in battle, but still, damage they would much rather not have taken. Crossbow Corsairs getting into a position to fire, as are the Heavy Goblin Archers. Here comes the Goblin King Bodyguard and the Blackback Berserkers. This could be where an awful lot of this battle is settled, because there's a lot of routing going on now from the Heavy Goblin Halberdiers. And the Dwarven counter-attack in full effect. In fact, the defending counter-attack in full effect now as they charge down from the hill. I'm not sure whether the attackers had all of their units ready to reinforce quickly enough. They were scared to move their elite units in, like the Goblin King Bodyguard and like the Blackback Berserkers, because if they did, they knew they'd just get shot. But now, their initial line routed off. Now those Halberdiers may very well come back. That's a lot of manpower that they've lost to their front line. And you know things are bad when you're relying on heavy goblin archers to sort of try and counter-attack and get a nice rear charge for you. Because they aren't going to get very far.
Winning the battle. If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, the Blackback Mountain Berserkers immediately finding themselves the target after defending skirmishers. Although, to be fair, it looks like they've stopped firing, so they might be out of ammunition at this point, and the Blackbacks are still pretty strong. Naruna Aru Royal Guard are still alive as well. It's another multiple HP unit, so that's 3 multiple HP units in all, counting the Goblin King Bodyguard, which might be a little bit difficult for the defenders to deal with, depending on how this goes. And if they have run out of skirmish power at this point, that was rather inopportune, because at this point it would be really useful to cut these Blackback Mountain Berserkers down to size. But as is, doesn't look like that's going to happen. Also our Blackguards. Those cave trolls using that big tree log as a weapon. Here come the heavy goblin halberds. They did come back from routing. They're immediately being recommitted. I don't know how long they'd last in melee. Of course, our Blackguards still have ammunition. That could be a big thing. If they use their skirmish power wisely at this point, the attackers, they could yet do something, although they are rapidly running out of manpower. I'm amazed there's still so long in the fight left, to be honest with you, considering the attackers only have 6% of their whole army remaining. It's within 10% though, which, considering the amount of troops that were on the battlefield, that's quite something. Ironfoot Spears doing a bit of a shimmy there. They are moving down the hill though. Committing piecemeal like this might be a bit of a mistake. Honestly, if I were the defenders and I wanted to commit forward, I would just say commit everything. Commit some units to try and stop the Crossbow Corsairs and the Black Guard, I should say, from firing. Commit some units over there to do that. But engaging one by one is a little bit more risky. I mean, they should still be fine. They pulled out enough of a lead that they should probably still win this. But the Blackback Berserkers are a tough nut to crack. With all that damage they deal. Certainly with units like Ironfoot Spears, I mean, they're going to do really very little to Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Especially when they're supported by Corsair Blackguards. Thala Rangers coming back out. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers do still have ammunition. That's a big thing. So again, this could be sort of ploys by the defenders to commit forward individual units so it blobs the attackers up. Allows them to get more damage done. You can see very quickly there that the Blackshot Dragon Slayers skirmishing into the Corsair Blackguards, forcing them to retreat. The Thala Rangers actually chasing them down as well. They're actually going to go after the crossbows.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, we're now within the final 10,000 frames. But at this point, you know, the attackers getting some work done with these Blackbacks, the Goblin King Bodyguard. Again, they've still got the Naruna Royal Guard, which are no slouches. They may be spears, but they're multiple HP spears in melee. Crossbow Corsairs, fighting off the small amount of Athala Rangers that tried to assassinate them. Not having the most luck with that as it stands.
The battle is very much in our favor. If we remain true and steadfast, victory will be ours.
Yeah, I'd still say the defenders have got a big enough advantage. They should probably win this. Even so, Goblin King Bodyguard, I mean, it's going to be close. It's going to be close. If the defenders don't make like a catastrophic error in judgment, then I still think they should probably win. I mean, they've got like pikes, they've still got some armor-piercing projectiles with those black shots, they've got the Highborns of Erebor as well. You would imagine that they have too much for the attackers at this point, particularly from a morale standpoint. Some crossbow fire, however, going into this front line, killing off yet more of the defenders' manpower. They've still got the Blacklock Engineers as well, which they're pretty decent in melee. Not the match of something like Blackback Berserkers, but... And now you can see the defenders are just going to retreat to the top of the hill. And there goes those spears. So that is going to be that. Naruna Royal Guard trying to get into a good position, but at this point I imagine what the defenders are going to do is just sort of post up here, put their pikes around this area here, and then just reinforce them. And I think that will be sufficient to win them the game. Still got some Erebor Legion as well, which again, good unit. let's go up to ×2 speed while the attackers decide how best they want to approach this. Of course, the onus is always on the attackers to move forward, regardless of how hopeless the situation seems. With the manpower advantage you have going into the game, particularly if you outnumber the defenders by an army or even two, you have to be the ones to move forward at all times. The defenders are under no obligation to come out and get you. Those blackbacks just sort of hovering with intent. Yeah, and with all of these skirmishers coming forward, you can tell what the attackers are trying to do at this point. They're going to try and skirmish down the defensive line, which is a good way to force the defenders to come to you, but the terrain is not really on their side. It's going to be difficult for them to get into a position where it's going to be easy for them to kill off stuff like the pikes. They're going for the black shots as well. That's going to be the end of those Crossbow Corsairs pretty quickly, under a few volleys from the Wind Lancers. And those Blacklocks could go down the hill and charge into the Naru Naaru Royal Guard. And they are. You think they'd need support, especially after taking a few point-blank shots like that. I really like the look of the Naru Naaru units. Meanwhile, heavy Goblin Halberds moving up in support. Okay. Back down to 1 speed as the Blacklocks engage. There are still the Corsair Blackguards, the Goblin King Bodyguard, the Blackback Mountain Berserkers. I don't think there's any other way up here though. So really it's just going to be a matter of when, I think, the attackers finally break. That's the sound effect that you usually get from a cavalry charge. That's very interesting. As the White Uruk Fearmongers push their way through. Balance of forces is evenly matched. But I think that will turn against the Blacklocks eventually, if they aren't careful. Been a lot of debate around the Blacklock Engineers about whether they're OP or not, with their body-piercing crossbow bolts. There is one certain Erebor army combination, which goes into the red limit for the Blacklocks and gets 2, which is particularly potent, I hear. But you know, it's not quite on the same level of debate as something like the Witchers, for example, which I know a lot of people have got very strong opinions about. I don't personally believe the Witchers are OP, because I've seen them. You know, they will either get you tons and tons of kills, or they will die without doing anything, and that's a big risk to take on a unit that's as expensive as the Witchers. Especially considering Angmar have got such good options elsewhere, like the Witcher-Elm Blackguard and the Inquisitors and the Hammer Guard. Those are 3 very strong units which you could have instead, which are much less likely to fizzle out and do absolutely nothing. These Blacklocks still fighting hard. We can now see the Goblin King Bodyguard. They're actually winning this fight, the Blacklocks. The Naru Naaru Royal Guard needed support pretty badly, and with all of their might they would have been able to destroy these Blacklocks now. The support of the Goblin King Bodyguard might turn this fight around. You may as well go back up to ×2 speed, actually, considering this is the only fight that is taking place on the field at the moment. As the grind continues. But the defenders are probably going to win this. And it was against orcs on the attack, so I imagine people are going to like that. I hope. Here come some Corsair Blackguards, burrowing their way into the line. They're pretty good in melee, but they're not like really heavy lifters. And immediately the black shots, as soon as they start to try and push their way through, going to try and shoot them in the back. This will be the end of the Blacklocks, you would imagine, but killing off these Corsair Blackguards exactly what the defenders wanted. And at this point, they're going to move down the hill with Ironfoot Spears to truly finish off the Umbar Javelins. In fact, this might be it for the defenders as a whole. They might just charge their entire force down here to try and break the back of this attack once and for all. Here come more Corsair Blackguards at this point. Where on earth did those Blackback Berserkers go? They disappeared into the ether.
Our many enemy general is no true man. He flees the field of battle and abandons his men to their
Well,
fate.
Umbar admitting defeat. The first player to admit defeat in this battle is one of the forces that actually had a lot of men left. Those Corsair Blackguards could still have done a lot of damage. But as it is, He has left Belisar to his fate, and it's just now going to be a matter of hunting down what remains of his army. That's a bit of a shame, I suppose. There are the Blackback Berserkers at the very least, because, you know, it was very unlikely they would have won this, given the situation that was in front of them, but it wasn't impossible still. If you got fortunate with those javelins when they got thrown in, you know, maybe it was a little bit reckless to commit that unit of Corsair Blackguards, considering you're basically pinning your entire hopes of winning on them at this point. But now Belisar on his own certainly doesn't stand too much of a chance. The defenders are going to win. Good to see TOL FALAS again, because it's been a long time since I've shown TOL FALAS. So good to see the map again. Yeah, this is going to be just the defenders committing forward everything at this point, trying to overwhelm the Blackback Berserkers, which are still going to get a decent amount of kills. We've seen how strong they can be. Siege of Bursagath, which we, the last scenario that I showed how strong they can truly be. Oh, there he goes. Azog destroyed.
If we continue like this, we will smash the enemy.
The defenders are going to win. Foregone conclusion at this point. But based on the amount of frames left, you can see that the Blackback Berserkers are certainly not going to give up without a fight. But big thank you to Stewed Balrog for sending this one in. And again, this has worked out very differently to all other... What the hell's going on over there? Oh, that's just the routing Umbar forces. Again, like I said, TOL FALAS very rarely works out the same way twice. At least every time I've shown it, it's worked out differently, all 3 times. And this...
We must pursue and hunt them now.
While I was a little bit apprehensive when I saw that Son of the Dunedain was going to move to join up with his teammates, and we weren't going to see the more traditional way TOL FALAS works out in the second half, where it turns into the defenders being split 2 and 2. In the end, this has turned out to be a good move, because the defenders have won this time around. It does go to show how defensive and difficult TOL FALAS can be for the attackers to get through. Another player admits defeat. Blackback Berserkers just doing what they can. I'd be interested to see who got the most kills on the defending side. I'd be interested to see how many kills Gondor got, because that was a very bloody fight that happened very quickly. I was worried for the defenders after Gondor's flank fell, because the orcs started pouring into the settlement, but the defenders kept their cool and set up a defensive position which has stood the test of time in this battle. Victory seems certain. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers proving their worth in this fight as well. The Blacklock Engineers doing extremely well. The Wardens of the White Tower showing their prowess against the Nazgul and the Nazkai. All around a good battle by 3 of the more defensive focused factions in the game. As we approach the final point in this battle, the Blackbacks are going to... He admits defeat.
Victory is ours.
Indeed, and the most kills does indeed go to Gondor, so it does show that initial battle that Gondor had, their defensive line may have fell very quickly, but they also killed an awful lot of men as well from the Mordor and the Isengard lines. Isengard, they had a lot of Uruk-hai raiders and such, and that's probably why they got the least amount of kills. I still think Froggy did a very good job, considering the fact that he held in there for a long period of time. Mordor got more kills, but then they also faded more quickly. The Misty Mountains getting the most kills for the attackers. They lasted the longest and had the strongest men left in the late game. Shame that Umbar didn't stick around and use those blackguards, because they would have killed a few more. I still think the defenders ultimately would have won, but still, good game all around. Let's have a look and see what Stewed Balrog did. Thala Rangers getting 355. Unsurprising. Surprised actually the Rangers didn't get even more kills considering the situation. Girian's Paladins with only 108, so a bit of a disappointing game for them ultimately. The Blackshots did very well. Morroquendi Bows did very well again. They went almost completely unnoticed really, but it's very difficult in a big game like this to keep track of archers like that. With Morroquendi Bows doing a very good job there, and that's pretty much it. The rest of Dale's army did okay, sort of more average. But yeah, thank you to Stewed Balrog for sending this one in. It's always a pleasure to see TOL FALAS again. And yeah, I think next it will be another sort of... I think we'll be seeing Arthedain in action in in some field battle or battles, depending on how that goes. But yeah, I think this was a good one. I enjoyed how close it was as well. The next the next larger scale battle I've got going on is going to be another scenario from the Spawn of Sauron Discord. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.